Okay, so for the webcast, use of Welsh language. We welcome the use of Welsh language, but I haven't received any notifications to use it today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. And a reminder that the meeting is being webcast and will be available to view whenever and wherever people wish to view it. So, one, there's no other filming of the meeting needs to take place, and two, can we all remember to use our microphones when speaking so the webcast can pick it up. Other than that, can I just ask that any mobile phones or noisy devices be put on silent before we start? Okay, so if we go on the table then, so I'm Jess Powell, I'll be chairing the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Geraint Thomas, Democratic Services, I'll be taking the minutes.
Julian Devane, Police Service Manager.
John Tushingham, Head of Access and Engagement.
Ben Jeffrey, Sports Development Officer, here on behalf of Stuart Lawrence.
David Williams, Torvine Youth Service Manager.
Glyn Caron, Councillor and Member of Committee.
Councillor Rose Seaborn.
Councillor Colette Thomas, Tullochs and Henfless.
Councillor Gwyn Jenkins.
Bernard Williams, Co-opted Member.
Leanne Skerritt, Improvement and Scrutiny Team.
Okay, so if we go to the agenda then, we just deal with the first items. Number 1 is attendance, registers by there. Number 2, apologies for absence. Geraint, have we had any?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've got 4. We've got Councillors Cathy Evans, Alan Jones, Richard Overton and Raymond Williams.
Item 3, declarations of interest. Does anybody have any they want to make? If any come up as we're going through, just remember to write them in the register as well. I'm looking at my agenda and I've got the wrong one up. After all that. Just a second. Item 4 is actually the action sheet. Do we have any updates? Okay, and then item 5 then is obviously opportunity-led review, play, sports development and youth services, so I'll just hand straight over.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, members. The report is 3 main parts. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to run through the first and the second, and then we'll pause to see how you want to handle the third, which is the filling really of the discussion this afternoon, I feel. So just to start then, a bit of context really. The 3 teams, play, youth, sports development, joined education over the last couple of years. Previously to that they were working to Dave Congreve. I want to stress really from the outset that this is an opportunity-led review. It's not because we get a lot of criticism or adverse comments about the provisions that are made. I think I feel very comfortable in saying that we get a lot of good comment made about what's on offer at the moment. The question that we posed ourselves and the question that we're inviting you to discuss this afternoon is, could we be doing more? Could we be doing better? Could we do it differently? I think it's fair to say that today the 3 service areas do collaborate, but it's on the margins, so they largely operate independently of each other, with some joining up. If you've looked through the report and had a look at the figures later on, which we'll talk about in a minute, you'll see that they are heavily reliant on grant, and that grant is quite fragile because I don't think Ben will mind me saying in particular that his team, I think, put on notice pretty much every year of potential redundancy because the grant doesn't get notified until, well, actually we haven't had notification formally yet. We've had an informal note. So it is, it's not the best of financial environments. But what we can say is that grant funding doesn't come with strings for everything that we do. We can shape what we do in response to grant money. We can certainly shape how we do it. So the grant conditions themselves aren't particularly prescriptive, and to slightly varying degrees, less so in play and sports development, the legislative position doesn't really have an impact. In youth, it's a little bit more prescribed, but again, there's a fair bit of scope to decide how you're going to do it, what you're going to do. So we're asking you this afternoon to explore some of the challenges that we've talked about as a group, and in order to get a wider appreciation of people's views on some of the issues, we issued a survey back in January, out for a number of weeks. I think there's over 150 people that we invited to comment, and we got just shy of 100, which actually is pretty good going for a survey. That's some of the high-level background. If we go into section 2 and talk about sort of the services in a little bit more detail, paragraph 2.1 talks about what each of the teams focuses on, what their purpose is, and I don't think I probably need to dwell on that. I think you probably have a fairly good understanding of what the three each areas focus on. We've talked about legislation. Youth has more prescription than the other two areas, but there's a lot of scope within that prescription. In terms of budget, if you look at paragraph 2.3, it is about £100,000 a core budget in play out of a total of 600,028. So it is almost all grant funded. Sports is not too far off. It's about 200,000 core on a £500,000 budget, and youth has got the most core, just under around about 400,000 on a total budget of 875. So there's varying degrees of corporate core cash that goes into these three services, but most of it is grant. The assumption that we've worked on to date is that there isn't likely to be any new money unless additional grant funding is made available in the future. We've taken that view simply because of the financial environment that we're in as a council. I'd be lying if I didn't say that all three of the managers and myself wouldn't welcome additional money, but we've got to be realists. And so I think it's safer to work on the basis that we've got what we've got. There may be some additional grant opportunities going forward, but I think the reality is more likely to be that funding will be pretty much standstill, if not in decline. That's just a reality. I think sports development last year, we had a standstill budget. In effect, that's a negative budget because we got the staffing costs increasing year on year. And I think it's the same in youth, and it's pretty much the same in play. The difference is that the balance certainly would play in terms of the amount of grant that you've got. Core becomes less significant, and your grant becomes more significant. Paragraph 2.4 sets out in a table that the main types of provision is made. It's not exhaustive. There'll be other bits and pieces that drop in from time to time and bits that may drop out. But largely speaking, they're the areas that they focus on. Huge, actually. There's an awful lot in there, and it ranges across quite an array of different age groups, of different geographies, and just different types of provision. There's a lot of value in there. There is a lot of value, I would argue. When we were talking about business planning this year and the year before, the issue of sustainability came across very strongly to me. I could see it in the figures, and I think all of the three areas themselves would say their concern was how do we keep these plates spinning in the financial situation that we're in. And we set out at that stage, probably about 8 to 12 months ago now, the sort of things that we might have to consider. So if you look at paragraph 2.5, I've got to stress that these are just things that we were thinking, well, these may be in the area that we've got to think about. But reflecting on what we did, reflecting on what we thought people thought of our services, from what surveys it said, so place efficiency survey, sports survey that goes out to schools pretty much every year, Ben? Every 2 years. And survey work in David's area. We felt that there was probably more scope for the three areas to work more closely together, and particularly to get that continuum of provision pretty much from prenatal to 25. Ben's world is slightly different because 25 isn't the cut-off, it's lifelong. But for the purposes of the review, we're concentrating particularly on that 0 to 25 area. We wanted or thought that there was more scope to deliver holistically, so rather than have separate provisions in separate places at separate times, could we try to bring some of them together so there was more consistency, a better offer overall? We were talking about things like administration. I think it's fair to say that we don't have a lot of administration. That means officers are doing administrative work, and it's just how do we manage that where there are peaks and troughs. I'm not going to read through all of these. I'll pick out perhaps some of the more significant ones. We were talking about the balance of work between in schools and out of schools, and whether or not that needs to be adjusted. Because if you're doing work in schools, you haven't got the opportunity necessarily to do as much work in communities. And finding the balance is quite difficult, actually, at times. We talked about how we deploy youth workers and whether or not we change the way that we deploy those. They were some of the, I would say, less painful, easier to deal with questions. But we came on to some bigger themes, and the second set of bullet points in paragraph 2.5 starts to unwrap some of those. So, do we work in greater partnership with voluntary sector groups? Do we actually commission and assist voluntary sector groups to do more than they're currently doing at the moment? So do we become a facilitator rather than a deliverer in some cases? Do we look at the issue of duplication between the Youth and Engagement Progression Framework and the youth service, because they are dealing often with the same young people, and if you've got that provision in two separate places, sometimes you don't get the best, and you do get duplication, which is wasteful. We did say that it may be necessary to think about lining up with the Leisure Trust in sports development more than we do at the moment, and possibly even them becoming part of the Leisure Trust. We know we've got what they call the CSAP, Community Sport and Activity Programme, coming on stream, and it's probably worth me just spending a minute explaining what that is. Currently, funding from Sport Wales comes into the authority. In future, funding will come into a collaboration of a number of authorities and other providers. So that they want to set up, ideally, they want to set up 4 regions in Wales. It may be more than that by the time they finish, but that's the plan. So, do we at some point have to explore not so much that allegiance with a trust and lining up with a trust, but actually with neighbouring authorities? Do you actually think about setting up a legal entity with authorities to deliver the same, or hopefully more, with a more efficient body? We certainly know we've got to improve the planning, support and delivery of activity. I don't think there's any question about that. And planning across the 3 areas to get that consistency of provision. So we've been in this sort of territory for a while. The survey really was, it went to probably in excess of 150 organisations or organisational contacts. And for some, they won't have been able to answer all of the questions because they're not familiar. They might know play well, but they don't necessarily know sports development well. That didn't matter for our purposes. What we wanted people to do was provide comments on things that they did know about, or they had an opinion on something that they wanted to get across a view. Having a thorough understanding of these worlds doesn't really matter. But it is worth noting, if you've taken any time to look through the individual comments that came back that are appended to the report, that some of the comments reflect the fact that they don't know, not that they necessarily disagree or have an adverse view of something. They just don't know. Now, that doesn't mean to say that they don't know because we haven't properly communicated in the past, and communication is something that also comes out of this exercise, improved communication. But we're in that position where we will have some comments that, quite frankly, we look at and we don't understand because they don't make sense to us in the same way the question didn't make sense to the person who was reading it. So that gives you sort of some of the context. When it came to trying to work out the best way to present this information to you and tease out the issues that we thought were worthy of conversation, I've literally gone through the survey responses, tried to concisely say what the main messages were on each of the questions and what questions you may or may not want to ask. So, Chair, I don't know how you want to do this, whether you want me to run through each of the headings, pause after each one and allow you to talk, or I fear if I go through them all, by the time I've done that, we'll be repeating ourselves a little bit.
We had a pre-agenda meeting this morning and come up with some questions and comments based on that, so I think it'll probably be easier to go through ours, if you see what I mean, and then we can pick up any then after that, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay, so you can run the table. I think Rose is ready and prepared.
Thank you very much. My name's on the first question, so, and it links to your last comments, actually, John. How do you communicate what you do and the services that you offer, and how often do you engage?
If it's okay with you, I'm going to ask the guys to...
Shall we go through? Yeah, because it's a joint service provision.
Do you want to start, David?
Yeah, sure. So we have an online social media presence. So we've got Instagram, Facebook. Somebody younger in the team deals with that. So we're quite regularly presenting on there. We do a biannual consultation with parents and young people who are service users, so not the general public. We have a biannual awards evening where we invite people along to that as well. And then we also have a national programme of events. So we have a Youth Work Awards evening nationally. That's in June as part of Youth Work Week. We've also just had a National Youth Work Conference which ran in March. They're the sort of the consistent mechanisms by which we communicate our service, and then we have sort of ad hoc meetings with various organisations to promote what we do and market what we do and share what we do. So that's what we do. Is
Okay. So if I wanted one of my grandchildren to go to play sports development or youth, how would I know that was out there?
So we've currently just updated the use of the Family Information Service and the national website DAWIS, which puts all our youth provisions on, and that gives a description of the provisions, the times they run. I'm not sure if the latest round of information has been uploaded. We've submitted our information to the central team that deal with that. I don't know if it's made its way to the website yet. I couldn't clarify that. So there's that. There's also via our Facebook and Instagram that also shares our provisions and the activities that we do. And at key periods, summer, half term, and those, we have a presence on Swoop where our poster and activities are on there. We also then plaster posters everywhere around the local authority, really, anywhere they'll have them, shop windows, lift walls, although since they've been redecorated we've been advised not to do that. But that's generally how you'd find out.
Probably the three of us will talk about social media being probably the first port of call these days for any communication that goes out there. As Dave said, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, everything goes on there. The contacts we have with the schools, if there's, for example, any particular, thinking of your grandchildren, if there's an event coming up, that goes out to the schools. We make the schools aware, the relationships we've got with them. It allows us just to be able to drop an email quickly to somebody, can you pass this on to the relevant teacher for whatever age group it may be. We've also, with the link now with the Leisure Trust for the awards evening, as Dave has said, we do an annual Torban Sport and Heroes Award, so we're able to get communications out through there. Also, the Leisure Trust do a lot of advertising for us on our behalf, with if it's just putting posters around on the relevant sites. That goes on, and again, the Dowis website, we're in the process of working with all the community clubs to get them uploaded. We're kind of lucky that two of us within the team have access to be publishers with it on Dowis, so if a club comes in, they literally tell us straight away and we're able to upload that.
And then from our original members of the community trust board, where does that fit into the sports development?
We still look after the community chest on behalf of Sport Wales. It is going through, or grassroots funding is going through a review nationally with Sport Wales at the moment. So that's evolving at the moment. But yeah, we're still overseeing community chest, and it was quite nice this year. We had to go back and ask for more money because we'd spend it all.
Could I just ask on that issue, does that form part of that 314,000 that comes from grant and income funding? On your page 18, the community chest, is that in with your grant and income funding of 314,872?
No, that would be so. The 300,000 there, that is for staffing costs. The community chest is what goes out to community clubs and groups.
So acting as a
So
banker,
that's, yeah,
essentially.
so that helps with grants.
So it's not in this.
It's not, for our purposes, it's not real money. It's money that we just act as a banker. Yeah.
Thank you. In regards to play, lots of similar sort of things. We have a big presence on social media that goes out daily, and Twitter. We are very proud of promoting everything we do, I suppose. Torvine website is very much all the information goes out regular within Torvine. We work very closely with schools on all our provisions. We're very good at going into primary schools and secondary schools in regards to telling what's on offer for children in assemblies to make sure they're fully aware of it. Letters go home a lot to all the children who attend provisions. For the summer programme especially, we make sure there's enough information given out to every single child across Torvine that is given out to every child so they're aware what is out there and what is available to them. We run a parent and carer forum which parents can come along, especially for those parents with children with disabilities. If they are concerned about what level of support they can have, they can come and meet the team prior to the provision, identify what level of support their child requires, and we make sure we get it right, to make sure the training's in place, etc. That happens once a year, and we also, in the process of putting under the Family First Disability Strand, we're putting a forum together purely for children, families with disabilities as well, so that's a separate thing. And again, posters, we have make sure we contact all schools in regards to our model of using volunteers to support our provisions. So we've got to work very closely with the comprehensive schools, sixth form colleges, so people are aware what is available. So working that partnership is really important to make sure we get the staff to run the whole package in a sense. So communication is vital really to make sure it all works.
What comes to my notice is that I know where the play clubs are in my ward. I know where perhaps sports development is in the school within my ward. I don't know where any youth provision is in my ward. But how would I know that anyway as an elected member?
I'm going to come in on that one first, if I may, because there's a bit here which I think we can dance around a little, but the reality is 3 different sources of information. Yeah? So if you've got an average family There might be a 6-year-old, there might be an 11-year-old, there might be an 18-year-old. You know, I think what we have done to date is great. There's lots of good information doing the rounds, but I do think we could target it better, bring it together, and by bringing it together actually improve your understanding of what's going on, because if we don't tell you, we don't make it easy to find, then elected members aren't going to know, communities aren't going to know. So for me, that's one of the things that whatever else we decide to do as a consequence of this review, I think it will be a good idea to try and rationalise but improve the quality and the targeting of the information that we give out.
My comment was going to be just, sort of, not as a councillor, but as a parent of a younger child. I know what play you're doing, but I don't really hear about what anyone else is doing. Whereas, if these posters are going out saying, and look on, blah, 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 for everything that's happening, people have got that central point and think, well, if I've got an older kid or I've got friends or, it's just easier for people to find out.
I mean, in part, it's a function of them being 3 areas in the past. They've developed approaches to things. And now's the time to think, well, do we approach it in unity, really, and do it as an offer, which is that 0 to 25, and in the case of sport, it'll extend beyond that. But one single source of information or one channel that brings together the 3 different sources of information, which hopefully will improve things.
I think it's a fair comment. I appreciate where the comment's coming from. I think a bearing of that is just volume of provisions. We have significantly fewer provisions in the youth service than both play and sports do. That's for a whole variety of reasons. Just by way of example, in 2011 we had over 18 youth clubs across Torfaen. We've now got 2. So there you go. So I think if you're living in the area where there is a youth club, you probably know about it. Whereas there are the best part of 20 wards across Torfaen that don't have youth clubs, so I won't hear of them. And the nature of what we do is very much young person led, so they look very different from month to month, to term, because the young people are designing the provision. So that does give us a bit of a headache when it comes to marketing it. But it's a fair comment. It's something that, as John says, as a service on our own, we need to improve at, as well as a collective.
Some of it was answered, Chair, but how will you improve on this, and what methods do you intend to use to engage effectively? I mean, there are, lots of duplication in what we've just heard. So, how do you intend to engage?
Sorry. Just this last year, we were successful in getting the Participation Standards Award, which I have to say was significantly helped by the work that these 3 teams do with young people. But we're committed to that as an education service. I think we need to follow what's in those standards and apply that to the communication in this particular area. And that doesn't just mean giving information out, but it also means how we collect information in. And there are some, existing ways that we get that information. I think I've referred to some surveys. David's referred to the way that it's led by young people. But I don't know if we're quite there yet in the breadth and frequency of collecting information.
Yeah, so my question's following on from the collection of information. So it's, do you have an up-to-date assessment of the services young people in your area want and need? Are they being delivered? But more so, what is forming that assessment? What database are we, base of data are we using to form?
Obviously, we put together, Welsh Government put forward that there is a statutory opportunities for children to play, and part of that consists of putting a police efficiency action plan together. And we want to make sure everything we are delivering is child-centred. So by doing that, we make sure we go into schools, we consult with the children, find out what they want, where they want, how they want it to be delivered. Same with community members, that we did a mass It's about 18 months ago now we did a huge piece of work to identify what was there and how people wanted it to be delivered. So over the years, if you look, for example, the biggest period for us would be the summer, and provisions have changed. This is purely to find out where children do play and where they want to play. We've got to get it correct. We are older, and those children, they know what they really want. So that has been a big part of that sufficiency. There's 9 different actions, and one is making sure it is all child-led and child-centred to make sure we get it correct.
Before David comes in with the youth and then Ben on sport, the play sufficiency, as you may or may not know, also extends to older age groups. So there are sections in there that relate to people who would fall into the youth world. So we get some information back from that. But David, if you want to just talk about the other things that you do.
So I think a key underlying principle is participation and consultation is embedded through youth work training and practice. So just day to day, the young people design the provision that they want. So when you're working with a cohort of individuals in any given area, they will then map out, design and do, and we will build around them what they want for that next 6 weeks, 8 weeks. So it's integrated, it's embedded in practice generally. But in addition to that, we do a biannual consultation. We're currently in the middle of it at the moment, where we go into the schools, simply ask 2 questions to the young people. What issues do you feel young people your age are facing, and what provisions would you like to see more of in Torfaen? As a result of that engagement 2 years ago, that then changed the delivery of our summer programme. What became evident is that young people wanted to more so try activities that they otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to, try something that would take them out of their comfort zone, and do something that would involve making friends and meeting new young people. So it completely altered our summer programme, and that was booked out. That was really good. We also have youth forums. We have youth forums in partnership with the Young Carers Group, the Gypsy Traveller Group. We have a youth forum with our post-16 young men, a young men's group, Social Care. So we have a lot of structured forums within provisions in which we're constantly gleaning young people from. And then there's national initiatives such as the Make Your Mark ballot, which gives us really, really good feedback. An example being that mental health and emotional well-being is an issue that young people are constantly saying is something they want to address. So that then has had an influence on the PSHE curriculum we offer to the schools around that informal learning and that environment where they can build a relationship with a trusted adult to support them through things like stress and anxiety and the likes. So yeah, and another key element is through key working partnerships. So we work, the majority of services that we deliver are in partnership, and where there are gaps in service, we look to meet a need. Example being working with the early years team and the NHS, there was a gap in activity for young parents, the ability to get to activity. So 3 years ago we set up a young parents provision, and that was shortlisted for a national award last year. We came second, we were robbed. But this has been recorded, isn't it? Sorry. But yeah, so that was recognised as good practice. But that's an example of where we build things in response to need through working in partnership as well. So it's multi-layered. Sorry.
I think from the sports point of view, our main one probably starting out is the school sports survey, which comes out from Sport Wales every 2 years. I think we're due for that to come out again this year. It goes for every school or every child across Wales. We work with the schools to make sure we get above the certain percentage of it that are filled in. That paints a picture not only for us as the authority, but for each individual school. We then go back and work with the school to try and have a look at how the picture is painted from their pupils, really. Develop what's needed then. That kind of goes hand in hand then with the relationships we have as officers with the schools. We're starting to look more at the pupil voice. There's a big push on leadership, particularly bronze ambassador levels, which is year 5 and 6. We're working with kind of their select school council members. Some of them do have a sports council as well, so it's going to them, seeing what the need is in the school, what the current trends are, and then how we can sort of mould our work to fit that. From a community point of view, obviously there's a vast range of sports and national governing bodies around the authority. Some of those sports, the larger mainstream sports, they can look after themselves, but they will come to us with specific needs. It could well be funding going to community chest or something a little less, so that the national governing body doesn't need to be involved with. But then you've also got a lot of smaller kind of groups of sports that maybe don't have as much support that they come to us for help with. It could be membership recruitment, it could be social media training. It's vast really, so it's building those relationships and working with the people to see what they want and what we can do to help them.
Country, as you touched on, the relationships between our schools. Obviously this committee deals with education as well as everything else that goes with. So what kind of relationship, and is there any gaps within that relationship that need to be picked up on?
I think so. We've got within the 6 comprehensive schools, we've got officers that cover each comp, and then that filters down to the feeder schools there. So we're just looking at what relationship we have with the comprehensive school. A lot of that now, whereas before it was very, should we say, just purely sport driven. Now we are crossing over to the health and well-being and working more with well-being officers within the schools to see how we can reach the harder to reach pupils and those that probably don't have the opportunity, that could kind of just slip in the gap really, if we're just trying to develop programs that fit around them. As far as the primary schools go, like I say, we run the Young Ambassador scheme for year 5 and 6s. Most schools come forward with around 5 or 6 leaders, and we look at running a Playmaker Award within the primary schools as well. So we'll go into a whole class and deliver a nationally recognised award to them, so they can run playground games, they can assist their teachers. So I think at the moment, possibly the gap as such was in the comps, the children that were lacking the opportunity, they didn't fit in certain categories, whereas at the moment now working with the wellbeing officers in the schools, that is starting to get picked up on.
Chair, can I just come in on that one? I think it's fair to say there's no shortage of demand from schools for support from all 3 areas. The challenge for us, as I mentioned it earlier, I think, if staff are in schools, then there's a cost to what can be done in the communities. It is a one or the other in some cases. If they're all occupied for 6 hours during the school day, well, they're not going to be available in the evenings for community work. So we've got to make sure, and again, I think this is something that forms part of discussions. Have you had the wellbeing offer to scrutiny recently? No. Well, the wellbeing offer is an attempt to make sure that schools are getting the support that they need, not necessarily the support that they want, because that can be 2 completely different things. Sport, play, and youth are all in that world, have been able to, potentially get people who are not managing well in school, who need a different way to be energised in school, but it's not. It shouldn't be as an alternative to education. It's got to be part of the education, and it's got to be to facilitate that young person's time in school rather than as just a diversion. So there's a pilot that is going to be run. I don't think you guys know this yet. So there you go. The wellbeing offer has been developed over quite a period of time, but it's getting to the point where it's going to be piloted on a school. I can't tell you which one at the moment, but so that we look as an education provider with all of the services that involves to see what provision is being made into that school, and is it effective? Is it good value for money? So that's probably due to start in the next few months, and I think that'll give us a much better feel for whether or not we are using our resources in the right places with the right young people.
My next question is basically on the back of that, is just how confident are we that the most appropriate young people, or those in most need, disadvantaged, vulnerable, are being targeted for services, and not just within schools as well. So, for example, we've got quite a growing population of children being homeschooled, that sort of thing. How are we reaching? How to reach groups?
We work very close to schools, social services, Families First, to make sure we can offer opportunities to all children. Summer average attendance, if we looked at it, was average across the board was over 3,000 children attending. Now, for the summer alone, we had, I think it was 187 children required one-to-one support. Some one-to-one, some were two-to-one, there was a one-to-four. So we're not just talking about children with disabilities, we do look at the social model, so we are looking at children who, for X reason, for whatever reason it is, to make sure they can attend that provision, we can put things in place. So we're training up volunteers, training up staff to have the necessary skills to support those children. And then that follows through not just through the summer, follows through into provision. On the weekends we run provision Saturday and Sundays, and we've got 25 children on Saturday, 25 on a Sunday. All those children who attend that have one-to-one support. And these have been identified either through Families First, Space Panel or social services. So we're making sure we are catering for those. What we are very keen is making sure we're integrating them as well. They need to be in their communities playing or being supported where they should be supported. We don't want to have a totally separate provision for those children. If we can support them, we will. On a weekly basis as well, now we are working with a lot of children who we use and play the tool to just integrate and support those after they finish their education provision. So we might be working with them, offering them opportunities, finding out a bespoke package, finding out what they like, what sort of activities they like, and they will be attending those with support. So it's all about making sure that support is in place to support whatever children's needs. I'm proud of what we do for that support, so hopefully that is covered.
It's a really valid question because we work in partnership closely with the schools, and we rely heavily on the schools to identify the young people that need the support. And I'd say the vast majority of pupils that we connect to in the schools really know their pupils and really care about their pupils, and they're concerned about building provision that is responsive to their needs. So it's good to be part of that, and it's a dialogue. It's not dictated to, but I think more work needs to be done around is that consistent across the board, because the provisions we offer in school look very different. There's a core offer, but it depends what schools take up. We work with vulnerable, really targeted work at vulnerable groups, like I say. So we're working with we know that sort of the LGBT community are more at risk of homelessness, post-16, young people leaving care, young people from gypsy traveller backgrounds. So we work with groups of young people, and it's very, very targeted. Alluding to a point John made earlier, but that's quite a resource-intensive provision because the requirements and the needs are higher. That's how we identify the groups of work, and very much in partnership. The area for improvement for us, if you like, is that missing middle, I suppose, that bracket of young people who aren't appearing on anyone's radar. So they're not the most disaffected from the schooling system, and they're not the high flyers, but yet come the end of compulsory school education, they just disappear. So we are working closely with other organisations to provide one-to-one mentoring at post-16. And again, it's quite intensive. That's finding the information, working in partnership with Careers Wales, knocking doors 5, 6, 7, 8 times in a week, trying at 9 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock at night, just trying to find these young people because they are really vulnerable. So, I'll leave it on.
Yeah, just following on what Dave said and what I mentioned earlier, now we are starting to look at that middle group, that they may not be classed as the most vulnerable, but they're kind of slipping through the net, and we do have programs starting in one of the comps after Easter around climbing and building confidence through that. We also have the Positive Futures scheme with us that works with community safety and Families First, and they're obviously going out and working with the schools, finding the targeted groups and targeted individuals and working individually with them.
Again, can I just put an overlay onto that? Because it comes back to your question earlier, Councillor, about communication. So part of this is about communication and how do we get to the people that we are missing at the moment. But there is a challenge in that. The more you engage with, you have to work differently if you don't have the additional resource to do it. So thinking about David's area in particular, one of the ways that we're going to have to try to engage with more young people is communicating information differently, making it more accessible to a wider group of people, not necessarily the intensive one-to-one work, because that will rapidly devour what resource is available. You cannot, on scale, do one-to-one work. It just, the logic isn't there, is it? So in addition to communicating differently, what we've got to look at is what we're communicating and how do we make that as useful. I don't particularly like the word self-service, because people who you would like to self-serve sometimes are the ones who are least likely to. But if we can get information and some of the resources that I know youth have been working with our education psychologists for people with issues that young people have, information packs of sources of advice and support, if we can target those, well, we may just reach more people without having to put an awful lot more resource into it.
I've looked at what we're asked to come up with, I suppose, as suggestions or ideas to put forward. But I'm very much a money man, so one of the things that I spotted in here that I thought may have been a bit more helpful was you've got, for example, in the play, you've got 521,673 was grant or income funded. I think it would have been useful for us to have had the grant and the income split out, because appreciating that no matter whatever we do, then we can't recommend areas that are going to be more expensive, because we realise that there's not the money about. And also, I mean, my question here is actually, it was quite bluntly written down, if 25,000 is taken out the overall budget, how would grant funding and service delivery be affected? So, you see what I'm looking at. I mean, I was at the budget meeting the other day, and, I can see the way things are going. Obviously, it's, you've already picked up on the fact that the grant is not very specific. But I presume that if there were some areas that we decided to remove or cut back on, then we would lose grant or we would lose income. So I think if you could give us an idea of, I mean, just that blunt question, that 25, if we took 25k out the overall budget, which one of these branches would suffer the most, and which one could take it up? I mean, I can guess from looking at how much grant funding you get and how much, but
Just in terms of the split between grant and income, I can tell you now that the vast majority in all three sets of figures is grants, not income. There's very little income coming in, so you are talking about being reliant on external bodies who provide money on an annualised basis. And the last 2 years suggest that that pot is at best standing still, and in reality reducing because of the increase in costs. What a horrible question. Who loses out most if we take 25,000 out of the budget? Well, what does it mean in reality? It means 2/3 of a person, I think. Is that a fair way of describing it? There's no sort of fat to chop out of these services. And I won't. Your knowledge of figures, I'm not going to. It's logical. Where is usually where the biggest amount is, will technically suffer the least. But we are talking about individuals here. We are talking about, if we take out 25,000, we're taking out 2/3 of a person, and that will impact on delivery. There is a double whammy that if you take out a person and you can't therefore deliver, are you still able to meet the terms of your grant? But the grant conditions are, I think, you can interpret them quite widely. So it would not be something that we welcome. We know it's there in the budget. We certainly wouldn't welcome it, but we recognise the position the council's in. So if we have to do it in the same way that other areas have to do it, we will have to do it. And we'll have to do it in a way that doesn't compromise the grant.
Jumped over the questions. Mainly budget questions here, so apologies for duplication. But you mentioned very little income. My question was how much income from each of the services is achieved. I'll go on to the next one, which is in paragraph 1.3, you state the provision of each team is heavily reliant on grant funding. So what are the specific outcomes that are required to meet the grants? Is there specific outcomes that they have to achieve to enable them to get their grants?
Just in terms of the grant, income, after this meeting I'll circulate some figures which show you specifically what it is, but I think in terms of the second question asked, it's probably best for each of the guys to come in. Who wants to start?
Oh, I don't know. I'll start away and close it off. In regards to grant funding, we get a big percentage is making sure we can run play schemes. That is funded by community councils right the way across the borough. So that is how our play schemes are run. So there is something we have to meet for that funded. We also receive money from Families First, and that is to support all the one-to-one children with disability to make sure we can offer those opportunities 7 days a week. That is funded purely by Families First. We do run morning provisions in 2 of our primary schools 5 days a week, and that is funded via the schools. And I'm sure you're aware in the summer holidays we offer on 6 sites. We're looking at progressing this to more this summer, where we have breakfast and lunch provided by the catering staff in various targeted schools. Now that is a grant fund, that is a fund again from Welsh Government we get for that. There's some others as well, so a bit on the spot, I could break them all down, but there's some of them, but a lot of them, they've all got outcomes to meet for the money we receive.
Before the others come in, you won't have missed this, I'm sure, but that's money washing around in the same system largely.
Yeah.
So it in terms of a council budget and balancing that, it doesn't actually give you any more. Even if you stop it from one place, it's going to arrive somewhere else. So.
I think with regards to sports development, the vast majority of the grant funding comes from Sport Wales, and it is using Sport Wales visions. We're basically increasing participation in sport, getting more people active, getting people hooked on sport for life. As John said, we go above the age 20, 25 bracket, so it is working with people from cradle to the grave, really. There's also the Police Crimes Commissioner funding that comes with Positive Futures as well. And that would be it from us, really.
So in terms of the finance, I don't know if this will have any bearing, but as a spend, we're the lowest spend on youth services in the whole of Wales when it comes to youth work. That's just for your information. The Youth Sports Strategy Grant is a pot of money that's existed for a number of years, but due to a collaborative approach to working within Welsh Government, that's been significantly increased in the last 2 years. It's gone from approximately 90 grand up to about £290,000. That comes with specific work programmes relating to homelessness services and also emotional well-being, and it's also to underpin the youth engagement and progression framework, but that money sits with the Inspire to Achieve programme, which is in neighbourhood services. And then we have our core budget, as John explained. With regards to funding, the other thing to consider, although we don't generate a great deal of money as a service, we have over 4 members of staff matched into the Inspire to Achieve programme. That draws down additional ESF monies. None of that comes into our service in any way, shape or form. So that money is drawn down as a result of activity. So in reducing, as John mentioned, in reducing the ability to deliver services, it won't just have an impact on the ability to deliver services, but also the ability to generate additional income as well. So, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
But there was a couple of us in the pre-agenda, so the names of certain of you were against each question. So, how do you evaluate the impact of the services being provided, and how often do you do this? So, your evaluation process: are you doing this job? Are you doing it correctly? And is it the way that we want? And could we do it differently?
So it's probably changed with us a little bit, because previously it literally was working in schools, how many pupils could we get turned up at extracurricular clubs and just get them active. As time has gone on, as much as we're still looking to provide the opportunity, obviously funding goes down. Those opportunities kind of we have to work harder for, but now it's more of a we go with the so what kind of theme. Yes, you've got 25 pupils turning up to something after school. So what? And I can give you an example from one of the schools. We run a wellbeing boxing session. 30 pupils attend. They've got a waiting list in the school now. These are the children that are disaffected and struggling a little bit. So we've got 30 pupils attending 2 sessions a week in the local boxing club. From the 4 of them now have joined the local boxing club, and some of them, or particularly one, was a known troublemaker within the Ledge Trust facilities. He hasn't been seen on site since, and has now moved on to a higher level boxing club than what he started out with. With regard to how regularly we report, there's the monthly reports come in, the quarterly reports that we put in, going to a regional level. But from our point of view, because we're running these sessions daily, really, around the authority, it literally, if the right story comes in, it goes to John as soon as possible, really. So it's kind of constant, really, to be honest.
Just coming on that, we talked about CSAP before, the community sport that Sport Wales is driving forward. Historically, and you probably know this as well as anybody, they have very much focused on participation numbers. They recognise that that's not what they ought to be doing. They should be focusing on outcomes rather than how many people you get through the door. I think, and the guys will add anything extra from youth and play. We do a fair bit of counting bums on seats, because that is what we're required to report back. We do, and Ben didn't mention the If You Go, I Go scheme, but that's a classic example, and there's lots in the other worlds of it's case study type evaluation. It's not a widget. You can't count success. These are people's journeys quite often. And you know, without going into specifics of an individual, the sorts of things that you get in the case studies for the If You Go, I Go is, well, I no longer take antidepressants. You're not going to count that one. You know, I feel able to actually walk into shops now, and I didn't before. And this will happen in David's world in particular as well. And play, Julie, I mean, it's satisfaction, isn't it, to a large extent? Well, you know, children's enjoyment of playing, it's not something that you can attach a hard measure to. But having said that, the feedback that we do get back in those soft ways, I think there's one at record that we can be proud of. But also it's valuable in its own right. But I couldn't tell you now that we'll set up a system that shows you numbers and units and that we've beaten the target by this, that or the other, because it's just not that kind of world. Historically, that's certainly what people have asked for. I'm not saying there isn't a place for some, because one of the things that we definitely, I think, need to be able to show is how many people we're reaching. How many people's lives do we have an impact on? And that is numerical. That's quite straightforward.
So we do a range, in addition to what's already said. We do have a national youth service audit. It requires a report back on engagement, accreditations achieved, staffing complements, training for staff. So we have that. We also have returns that we have to do in response to the funding that we get. They all require different responses with regards to the targets you set. For us as a youth service, just where bums on seats is significant because attendance is voluntary. The young people come because they want them to. There's no statutory obligation. So if we have a packed out youth club, it kind of means we're getting something right because they're attending. All our provisions, courses and activities with young people are evaluated on a regular basis anyway. So we're constantly asking, what did you enjoy? What would you do differently? What would you like to do again? I did that on a recent residential we went on in February with over 70 young people attending. And that will then have an impact on the design of the residential next year. Then you go right down to an individual level, like John's described. The impact on the person's life is the most important thing to us. So we have a range of methods to catch that. So we do case studies, individualised case studies. Each of the team does one of those a year on a young person that they are building a relationship with or a group of young people. We have something called STAR charts and Richter charts as well, and they're similar. They do give you a numerical output, but it's the story behind it. So you ask a young person where they are at the beginning of a process. They give a numerical kind of association to that, and then some story, and then you ask them in the middle and at the end, and it captures that distance travelled. So we can place a percentage on the sort of the well-being growth in young people as a result of engaging in our services. But it's that so what question that's the important one.
Okay, in the world of play, obviously, a part of it, the place and action plan, we have to do returns on that and what we're offering, so, that goes back to the Welsh Government as well. But very similar to what the others have said, feedback is important, it is crucial that we get things. We're not always going to get it right, so unless we have that dialogue with the parent and the carer to make sure what did work, what didn't work, we can change it, let's see it, adapt it, we'll very much do so. And very much feedback with, we're consulting with the children on a daily basis. Parents and carers, if they want to meet up, we will always meet up with them. It's crucial to make sure we get it right. We meet with parents. Just by putting something in place to make sure you could support that family from a breakdown, by making sure, and it could be adapted. If that environment isn't working for that child, let's see what else we can do. Let's adapt it, change it to make sure we can do that. We want to support these children as much as we possibly can in whatever they wish to attend. So, we might think, oh, that's right for that child. It might not be right. So we'll think, okay, let's see, I will adapt this. Let's try this one. Let's change the support work. Let's do this. And it is about communication with them to get it right.
One around, it's more for the youth around the homelessness prevention. So I was just wondering, does that sit in with the homeless team as well? Sort of, is the funding shared, or is it solely with youth, or just a bit more about that?
Yeah, so when Welsh Government made that decision, they failed to mention that to the youth homeless teams at the time. So that was quite an interesting conversation when we first brokered that. But that's a really good working relationship we have here in Torfaen. So we've already co-designed a schools-wide call it mainstream, but it's basically a set of workshops and programs that deliver to young people in school as part of their sort of curriculum. So we've done that. We've also designed a very specific group focusing on young people who are 11 years old, who are already identified as being high-risk children within the care system, and it's a youth club to support those young people, knowing that they are significantly at risk post-16. That starts this month, so we're a little bit anxious about that, the nature of some of the young people. But more importantly, we're working with the Supporting People's Housing Forum to identify a subgroup of practitioners that provide services to young people regarding homelessness activities, to make sure that we're getting that right, that we're mapping services. So we already deliver in partnership with Bronavon. We work closely with those guys. Out of T. Cuffler, we're already working in partnership with Pobble as well, delivering services out of Hales House. So, as mentioned earlier, what's intrinsic to service design is that partnership approach. What hasn't existed until now, and this is what the money has enabled us to do, is to coordinate that better. And that needs to be sort of seen in light of coordination of services sort of holistically. So I hope that answers your question. I went off on one then. I hope that answers your question. Okay, thank you.
Just to add that money came in first time last year. We have had confirmation that it's going to be continued this year. we have hopes that it will be continued next year, but we have no guarantees.
You know, I can see a lot of what you're doing is educational and pre-homelessness working, if you like. But would you say, I mean, your largest percentage of people who are homeless would be in that 18 to 25 year age group, because presumably anybody under 18 would be picked up by social services in some way?
Social services will work with young people up to 25. They've got the looked after care leavers program. A lot of it comes down to it's that shared partnership approach to services. Social care, I can't speak on behalf of social care, but they have a statutory responsibility, so that affects the relationship, whereas we don't. We have a voluntary relationship. So we work very, very closely with the TIPS Post-16 team, and it's about building services in response to need. So I think it's having that holistic approach to it. Our homelessness figures in Torval are actually quite low in terms of young people that are actually homeless. But I think the reality is we have sofa surfers, we have that kind of anonymous homeless, if you like. So part of this exercise that we're now going through is drawing that information out and finding that information sits somewhere. Somebody has contact with that young person. If we don't have them, not having contact with them is contact within itself. So that's how we try to kind of establish that and then incorporate that into already existing systems. Yeah, but some of those young people within the care system, they're challenging for very good reason, and there might be a barrier there for engagement. So what we try and do is try and cover all bases and create options, but it's not easy. But,
Have you got good sort of working relationships then with social care and the looked after children section?
Yeah. Youth service specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic relationships with social care. And that cohort, like I say, especially with the post-16 social care team, we're literally in the midst of planning a residential for 35 young people 16 plus to go away, and that, you know, it might not sound much, but that's massive for these guys. That's their holiday. That's such a wonderful experience. And when you consider the values and principles that underpin youth work, it's about creating memories, it's about friendships, it's about trying new things. So that's really, really positive. And whenever we need to discuss young people in particular, if we've got concerns, the flow of information is really straightforward. There's no issues there. So yeah.
Next question, Chair. How have you reduced the number of young people needing to engage with statutory services, and has it had an impact on the first-time entrants and first-time entrants into the youth justice system, and what are the figures like?
Yeah. I'm going to stick my neck on the block here and say that I don't think we can give you a definitive answer on any of that. I'd be amazed. Sorry?
I think I would struggle. Anecdotally, we have, again, youth service, we have partnership programs that we run in partnership with the Youth Offending Service, and we have seen a reduction in the number of first-time entrants, which has resulted in some provision ending because the young people aren't offending. But again, without kind of nailing my banner to the mast, what I think we're experiencing is young people who we have fewer overtly risk-taking young people, and we have more health-conscious aware young people than we've ever had, more teetotal young people than we've ever had. National stats would, I think, back that up. But the young people who are involved in that risk-taking behaviour or offending behaviour, it's ever more extreme, ever more challenging, much more sort of require an intensive level of support. That's what we're experiencing at an operational level in terms of the data and stats to back that up. Like John said, I wouldn't be confident to say what that looks like.
As a member of the fostering panel, we notice a lot of young parents involved in drug and alcohol and having their children taken into care. And that's, you know, you might be looking at not having so many there, but it's about preventing the statutory services having a budget on that particular child or young person after the fact, and how much that costs the authority. So, you know, the preventative work is there, but it's measuring the cost of it in the long term, isn't it?
I think it's worth adding to that. You know, the work David mentioned, space wellbeing before, the family's first type arena, which is partly responsive but partly preventative to try and stem people's exposure to adverse experiences and therefore requirement for the services. It goes on. You don't always know what you've stopped because you don't know what's going to happen in the first place, for sure. But I think there's more work being done on that. So the MASH that's being set up now, again, is another lens on that. And it's something that, whilst we couldn't give you a definitive position, I'm pretty confident, I think, in saying that almost all of the areas, to differing degrees, help to shape people's lives, try to get them involved in good, healthy activities and experiences, and divert them off paths that could lead to challenges for them later in life.
Just on that as well, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to speak on behalf of all of us here. When you're a year-to-year funded organisation, it's very difficult to think long term. Just from a recruitment point of view, you know, if you're looking to recruit specialists to be able to support you in this area, you're not going to draw them in. It's not going to be very appealing. But also, you're not going to fix all the society's ills in a year. It takes time to build. It takes time to build that provision. I think maybe culturally that's what we all experience with that year-to-year insecurity with funding. So.
Okay, so I've got one. Are there any, well, I'm assuming there are obviously, but the specific barriers facing young people accessing services, whether that be time, place, whatever. But for each of you, I mean, if you could change one thing that you would think would get more people accessing that service, you know, what would it be? You know, do you have a thing that you think, yes, this is? Yeah. No, I can't say that it would help you get it, but you know.
Okay, well, in the world of play, majority of the provisions are full. You know, the weekend sessions is a waiting list. The Saturday and Sunday provisions are a waiting list. Majority of clubs are pretty much full. It would be about more opportunities. It would be if we'd like to try and target as many communities as possible and where children play, like I said earlier. It's having that opportunity to offer more, I suppose, because they are well attended.
Yeah, I think as Julia said, it's the opportunities. From our point of view, it's probably facilities almost, particularly the way the weather is or has been. But I think Aqua's probably great. Yeah. We know you're a fan of cross country as well, so it's good weather for that. But no, I think just having more scope to put more things on, because obviously we link with schools, but to be able to move on from once you've got the children hooked and the young people hooked in these schools, having somewhere else for them to go would be a massive benefit.
Yeah, I'd agree. Venue is one thing, but I also think transport for young people, particularly, is quite challenging. So if you're a young person in the north of the borough and you want to access provision, even in Pontypool from Blanavon, it's not easy. It's not. If you've got young people that are financially challenged, it's really difficult. 4 or 5 quid a bus ticket. That's quite a lot for young people. So transport is a massive concern for us. So for the young carers provision we run, for the young parents provision we run, we have to pay for transport.
Were young people involved with the consultation? If not, why?
Okay, so we've mentioned earlier that there are various consultation mechanisms with young people that we already had the information from, quite recent information, before we went into asking some of our more sort of professional organisations. So, no, they weren't at this stage. More likely when we get to the point of saying that we're going to do things in a different way, in the design of what we do, that's when we need to engage with young people. At this stage, it's the art of the possible that we're exploring, not some of the detail that I think we would need to be able to engage properly with people. I have to say that there is a disparity in the 3 areas. I would say that play, because of the play sufficiency, has probably as much information as it needs and gets that on a regular basis. I think it's similar in sport. I do think, and well, David doesn't take offence here, but I do think youth is the area that we probably need to expand on input from young people if we're seriously thinking about changing what's provided or where it's provided or how it's provided.
Just on the back of that, because obviously the other two, I mean, you've got quite statutory surveys going out, so you've got the school sports, etc. I mean, what scope is there to add questions on to those things that already go out, or is that Welsh Government and, you know?
The problem is they're pretty big already. And, you know, people's patience and willingness to sit through question after question wears a bit thin after a while. I'm not saying we can, and it does link into the communication. I know I keep coming back to this, but it does link into the communication bit again, because there's two phases to this, really. So if we are thinking we're going to make or need to make significant changes, then we need to engage with people en masse at that stage, young people en masse. But thereafter, we need to look at how we routinely collect that information, so you're not bombarding people with too many surveys, and the surveys you do send or the information gathering techniques you use are not such that it turns people off. Young people aren't very different from adults, really, in that they quite often won't say something unless they're not happy. If everything's going well, I used to work in the water industry, and they said, well, nobody ever phoned us until the tap stopped working. And it's a reality. Yeah. So I think we've got to, in terms of that long-term participation engagement strategy, the communications part, we've got to build that all together.
The youth service used to, because I go back a long way in this council, the youth service used to have a consultation process with keeping in touch groups and things like that. I think they're still there, but not to the extent that they were. But we used to have voting systems within the schools. We trialled those where, you know, they just had a button to press rather than put their hand up and talk. They could answer the question with a button and that type of consultation. I know the Youth Forum used to do lots of consultation, and it was one of the issues of this committee with the Children and Young People's Partnership document. You know, it had come to this committee. It hadn't gone to young people, and it's their document. So it is important the young person's voice is heard and actually taken account of, and perhaps as a committee we'd like to hear, you know, more of that participation. I know in play they participate a lot. I know how Julian have developed play, but they are the services. I was part of the council to introduce the TIPS project and Hales House, along with Glyn and Colette, and you know, so it's about having an update on how those are going, evaluating whether or not they need to have something added to them or taken away from them. And the young person's input is really important as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So just to add to what John said, I would the consultation and engagement we do with the young people that engage with our services, I would say, is very good. It's consistent, it's regular, it's thorough, and there is a really important feedback loop. We work with approximately 2,000 young people a year. There's about 16,000 young people aged 11 to 19. So where there is a significant gap is the young people that don't engage with our services. What do they think? What do they need? And that's where the gap lies.
But how could you do that then? How would you seek to engage with the ones that are not engaging? What plans would you have to do?
Yeah, well, it's already happened. We have your Make Your Mark ballot. We also we link quite closely with Rhiannon Bennett, and Rhiannon Bennett looks after the Youth Forum. And the Youth Forum is a representative body of and links with the schools' youth councils. So there are networks of consultation connection where young people have a voice in council matters already. If we're talking specifically about youth service activity, I think we do that through our biannual consultation. We'll reach over 500-600 people now in the next next 2 months, 3 months across the schools. So really it's about bringing that information together, I suppose. It's being gathered. We just need to bring that information together. I think from my point of view, though, is we've got to have the ability to be able to respond to that, which is a big part of this survey. A number of young people that we speak to are aware of the youth clubs, but they won't go because of the nature of the young people that are attending those youth clubs. And that's a challenge that is as old as time itself. But yes, making sure we've got the resources then to back up what we're asking them that they want.
Just to add to that, it is volume. So the small scale, the people you're working with, that bit is covered. It is how do you get to the people that and that is a volume thing. And just back to the question earlier about young people's involvement today, I don't think they really care whether it's 3 teams delivering it or 8 teams delivering it. What they're interested in is what's being delivered, which is why at this stage, we've not talked to them about this kind of stuff because, quite frankly, I don't think they'd be that bothered. But when it, well, yeah, or let's take a real life example at the moment. We are the community council in Pontypool has expressed interest in working collaboratively to do some youth provision. Can't say what that might be at the moment, but well, yeah, young people need to be involved in that. If we were talking about doing anything of that sort in any of the 3 services, well, it's about what they want to do. And one, we want to make sure that we're hitting what people want and need. But 2, we've got to get a sense of how much is going to be used. We can't deliver things which are not reaching a bigger audience, because one of our problems in some respects is we're not hitting enough people. There are too many people who are not benefiting from those services, and I know it's bound by resources, so we've got to be careful what we offer, but it's just trying to eke out a few more contacts with what we've got.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, so working with other organisations, and particularly obviously other, youth organisations, so whether that be faith, third sector, whatever, how close are our links? Are we duplicating? Are we using every opportunity to work with them, etc.? What are they like?
A lot at the moment, sorry guys. Yeah, we link up with quite a range of other organisations. So we've got we work quite closely with Nodfa Baptist Church in Aberystwyth. We were able to support them to draw down funding to improve their circumstances. They provide us a venue to work with our young parents and community. Also, we work quite closely with those. Like I said, we work quite closely with Bronavon as well. They provide similar services to their Go Girls group. So we've co-delivered at times there. We work with voluntary sector down in Bronavon, Hub Torvine. We provide some sort of venue support. They provide funding for staff. It could improve. It could definitely get better. I'm not always convinced that we know exactly what's going on in any given area and the range of voluntary sector organisations that are out there. There is a national body, Queris, that looks after voluntary sector organisations, but that's a membership approach, so we don't always have the information. The information just isn't available to know who's out there. We do mapping, we do outreach and mapping of services, but as services became more and more targeted and resources became lower, we do less of that. But we do work with a range of partners through a variety of partnership networks and sit on partnership forums.
Seems a while since.
Sorry, Ben.
Can you go through the question again?
Just in terms of sport, I think I'm saying is what 80 local clubs or more.
It's expanding all the time.
Yeah. So in terms of the reach that you've got, and I can probably speak for play as well because it's very similar. It's huge. These 3 sort of out of necessity, actually over years, have had to reach out to the communities. One, because of delivering in the communities, and 2, we're often relying on things like accommodation or access to resources in order to do it. So I don't think there's an issue about how many. I do, and David's touched on this. I do think there's an issue sometimes about whether or not there's an opportunity to do more. And I think I've been in what, 20 years now, the council, I think, CCYP.
I remember coming.
Yeah. Well, probably. But if you think about the centre in Cumbraen, I don't know if that is. I think we can possibly review whether or not that is working to everybody's best advantage. I think Glenavon is another case where that's the case. I think there are examples in play where, Julian's always out talking to the community council. You probably see his face more than I do. But that needs to continue, doesn't it? And it will continue.
Yeah, and I think it's vital to make everything work. It's vital that we work with these different groups. TVA, for instance, we rely so heavily on volunteers. Now, you find out who can support you on that. You work with them, and if it could come down to a year training, who can deliver training to help you support? Who's got knowledge, experience on supporting that sort of vulnerable group? So we work very closely with the TOGs for Hope GB, overlapping sort of groups that Dave works with. But it's vital that you carry on those relationships to make sure things work and find out what is out there. So networking with the voluntary groups.
Just to go back to the efficiency bit of this whole exercise, 3 conversations quite often with similar organisations. Well, that logically doesn't make sense to me. So I'm not saying that there's a lot of wasted time, a lot of wasted activity, but logic would suggest that if you're able to have conversations once rather than 3 times, you're likely to get a little bit more resource back in your pocket.
Can I ask, is there any sort of liaison with the uniformed youth groups in the area, the Scouts, the Brownies and the Girl Guides? I don't know, I need to declare an interest. I'm a member of the Torfaen District Scouts, but I'm just wondering, there may be opportunities there to share perhaps facilities or equipment or even training. Is that something that you do or you could look at?
100% something we could do within sports development, with the leadership programme, without a doubt. We have linked with the cadets in the past for the Mid-Morris Torfaen 10K, and that's actually on my list to try and chase them down again this year, because they were the fantastic help setting up the 10K 2 years ago, I believe that was. But yeah, I mean, moving forward, the young leadership pathway, obviously it's sports related, the training, but I mean, it does tick the leadership boxes. So yeah, we would be more than happy to link with those groups.
I'm not buying you a woggle.
A lot of young people that are engaged in those groups, and I just wondered, what relationships did we have, if any, with them, and would it be something we could look at in the future?
We're working quite closely with the Scouts. They deliver training for us in the summer holidays as part of our summer placing. The techniques, the sort of things, the den building sort of things they offer within their world. They come in and they deliver training for us. And we get volunteers via the Scouts, which is really good. And also we're supporting a Scout group up in Aberystwyth, and we have joint venue and materials and all we support and share as well. So we do got quite a good relationship with the Scouts.
There could be scope for sports development and youth to perhaps get involved with these other groups.
Yeah, 100%. In the past, we've co-delivered with the police cadets, for example. We delivered training and the likes. But like Ben said, not like Ben said, that's not an area of work that we're doing much in at the moment. But I certainly would be willing to explore it with the contacts. Yeah, but absolutely.
I wanted to ask what contacts you have, particularly sports development, I suppose, but it also brings in youth, with the sports clubs. As an ex-member on the Welsh Swimming Association, Sport Wales, or Swim Wales, I should say. It's about, there's lots of clubs out there, and all sports, that have expertise in lots of areas, whether it's running the particular sport, safeguarding, or whatever it is. And how do you link with those sports clubs that's in the area? The same with, the youth providers. I know Community Council had a budget for a youth council, and that wasn't taken up, and that type of thing. So how do we cross-reference and link with the providers that are already there, third sector providers, etc.?
From a sports point of view, so the way the team works, we kind of have the main sports, the officers are responsible for those particular sports. So they would then have links with the national governing bodies and obviously the local clubs and the direct contacts there. And it's just a case of being in contact with them. You said earlier about the community chest. That is probably the main contact we have back and forward, because at the end of the day we want to be giving our clubs and groups the money, yeah, and if we can support them. And I think probably over the last 2 years, whereas in the past it could have been clubs were just coming to us and saying, here you go, here's my application. There's a far more sort of collaborative approach between us and the clubs now, where we are sitting down with them and saying, right, don't just say you want some equipment, you need a new kit. What's actually going on? What can we do for you within the community? How can we help you grow and get you that money? So yeah, we're in constant contact. It's still 1,500 at the moment. Like I say, it's going through grassroots funding. Is going through a review. I think we've spent 73,000 this year with the clubs. Yeah, very good.
They've just issued the invitation to put expressions of interest in, I think, haven't they?
Yeah, we were in Cardiff about 3 weeks ago. It was a whole national meeting on how things are going to move forward with the grassroots funding, and whereas before it's been community chest and development grants, they're looking at they could just become one kind of pot. So watch this space kind of thing, but it will move forward.
I mean, one of the suggestions put forward in here is Torvine Leisure, sports development being integrated in with Torvine Leisure. I mean, can you give us an idea of what you think the advantages would be and what you think the disadvantages would be?
Start. Yep. You can follow. We'd be talking about Tupi type transfer of staff, realistically, if you went down this particular route. We haven't done a lot of work in investing time on the benefits or otherwise of this, for the simple reason that we need some political direction before we start talking about potential Tupi in a staff. And for Ben and colleagues, as soon as you start talking about the potential to externalise a service, it gets a little bit scary.
Yes.
Some more than others feel about it. A similar arrangement in Newport. I don't know, was it a couple of years ago, maybe a bit more, that the sports development team went into the equivalent of the trust down there. There is a bit of evidence, but I couldn't give you a figure, that they are able to attract funding that a council wouldn't be able to, because they're a charitable organisation, so they potentially have reach into other areas. I haven't really got any information on has it led to a significant increase in the offer. It's an area that if it wasn't discounted just as a principle, I think we could certainly look at. But remember, as always with these kinds of things, have to balance then that it's a loss of control, because you would not be guiding sports development work if it were in the trust to anywhere near the degree that you could at the moment. Now that may not be an issue, but we.
Well, I think that depends, because I mean at the moment there's about 200,000 going into sports development from the council. Presumably, if Torvine Leisure Trust took it on, they're not going to say to us, "Look, fuck, don't want that. Don't need that 200,000. Thank you very much. That's great. We'll manage." So yeah, I mean, if we're going to give them 200,000 and then lose all control, it doesn't seem like it's a very good equation to my way of thinking.
Once again, your financial acumen comes to the fore. The issue, or the other question, though, is if you could do a lot more. So think of the end users. If it could be demonstrated that actually, for that amount of money, as it stands, you got a lot more, then that would start to tip the scales, possibly. And on the other side, you've got, you no longer got the control. You've got staffing issues to think about. But I simply can't give you the answers at the moment in anywhere near the degree that I think people would want before making that kind of decision. But essentially, yeah, the trust are going to say, well, we want the money that the council puts in, we want the money that comes through Sport Wales, and that would be a separate conversation in itself, because I'm presuming it must be possible because Newport have got an arrangement where that situation exists. But what happens in future years, I don't think the budget for these things is going to grow massively. I think it's going to be difficult, and then I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong. It's going to be difficult to keep pace with inflation. So
where Leisure Trust could be coming back to us and saying, "Oh, we need another 50,000 next year,"
or we stop doing X, Y, and Z. Yeah,
I think. I think from that point of view, we're trying to keep pace. Speaking to colleagues in Newport and other areas, potentially by being part of the trust and being a charity, it does open up those other avenues where we can go out and find that money. In Newport, they've said it's kind of made them more entrepreneurial to be able to go out and say, right, we want to run our wellbeing sessions. This is what grant funding is currently out there at the moment. I think from the control aspect, the vast majority of money is still coming through Sport Wales, and we're still governed by what we're reporting off for Sport Wales, and obviously going into the trust, I can't see how that would change anyway, because then that money could get withdrawn, and it's so I can't see that on the base level that it would impact what we do for the authority. It certainly, from speaking to others, gives us the opportunity to expand that. And as I said earlier, with regard, if the one thing we could have would be more opportunities related to facilities. If we're in the Leisure Trust, those facilities are kind of on the door.
The Leisure Trust, the responsibility is within the Education Department, isn't it, John? The Leisure Trust and funding by
the financial monitoring.
Yeah.
And commission is, yes.
Yeah. What about the strategic leadership, the corporate reporting? We haven't had the Leisure Trust into a committee, and it's been a while since, because I was one of the original trustees on it. It's been a while. We haven't had a report back how they're doing, whether or not is that available to us?
I must confess it's not an area that I've really had any involvement with. It was with Darren Joseph up till Christmas when he left. It's now with Dermot. I can certainly take that question back. Because it's a separate legal entity, I'm not sure what its governance arrangements are. You are still funding it and still subsidising it, I believe. So, yeah, I would have thought that there is a governance link somewhere into the councils. Yeah. Yeah, I can certainly take that back, yeah.
I think at this point, if I ask if we've got any more questions here, and then if I hand over to John, and if you wanted to pick up anything that you wanted to ask, through the questions and the agenda even. So is there anything here? Glyn? Yeah.
Just one last question for me, because it sort of runs on from the last one, because you were talking about sort of trying to find a fit between these three services, in the sense that, and you explained, when you go to the community councils, you end up going to them 3 times. So, looking at it, you can see some what seem to be obvious to me, but possibly are not so obvious to you, gentlemen. Links. I mean, when you look at tot sessions, you say 3 to 7. Well, play, yeah, definitely a link there. But then you've got other things like, youth offending, gypsy travellers, that really don't seem to fit in too many of the other boxes. So, have you any idea of how you would achieve this link without it costing any more money? Because the obvious thing to do is say, right, we'll have a head of service now, bang him in there at 50 grand, and So, you know, and then everything else stays the same, except you don't, because you've got to make that 50 grand from somewhere. So you suck all the poor devils at the bottom of the heap, if you like. So, yeah, I mean, have you got any idea how you can perhaps integrate these services?
There are things in these boxes that stand alone in each column. There's no question about that. And we're not suggesting that there's a single approach from 0 to 25 and 25 and beyond. But it's the points at which they can come together. And significantly for me, because I've had the areas probably for all together for about a year, just over. It's that continuity of provision for people that is missing. That's the big one for me. We've got people who go to play services, they've got older children, or their children grow up, as they inevitably do, and we don't provide a continuous place for them. There are bits of provision, so we need to coordinate it better. We need to offer it differently. We can't talk about spending more money because we haven't got it, and we're not like to get it. The bit about sports development, I think that whilst it's in its own right, things like well-being, you can't deny that sports is a direct link to both mental and physical well-being. Don't take offence. But I also see sports development as the thing that might entice people to engage with play and youth in a way that if it was just a play or a youth provision, they might not. So it's that added element that you sort of you bring people into the worlds of youth and play, who otherwise you may lose. So and when it comes to whether it sits here or it sits in the Leisure Trust, as long as we can maintain the links, that's the most important bit for me. How it's organised is less important. So yeah, different bits. It is definitely not about doing more unless we're able to do more with the same resource, because there's just no way that can happen.
But I mean, it seems to me that it would be difficult to maintain that continuity of movement if we put sports development into the Leisure Trust, because obviously that will be managed completely separately, and although there would still have to be that involvement with schools and so on and so forth, it strikes me that it would be difficult to bring that in with the other two services to maintain the continuity that you're talking about.
It would require more effort, no question. It would require a very tight commission. And I think it's a commissioning where you could make it work. But yeah, the problem with commissioning is it relies ordinarily on an intelligent client, so somebody who actually understands the world better than anybody else does and can assess whether or not what's being delivered is what needs to be delivered and it's being delivered to a quality that you require. When we have put services out of the organisation before, the intelligent clients go with them. So you don't have the expertise in-house to be able to say, well, that's good, isn't it? It's a good quality product at the right quantity, and it's exactly what we need. So the commission and how you keep that role of intelligent client would be key to making it successful. To that, these guys have sat here and answered questions this afternoon that, quite frankly, I couldn't have answered because I don't get involved at that level. So I'm not your intelligent client. But I may have to become one.
I'd like to ask the intelligent clients if they've thought about this merger, whatever, or the way forward for the three teams, and do you have any ideas on the way that we could be guided?
Do you want me to leave the room?
I think because I've mentioned it before, in terms of we've gone through a period of sort of significant austerity, haven't we? And that kind of it just changes the culture of your organisation to really hone in on to just kind of existing and staying alive. So I think it's learning from what already works. We've got examples of where we co-deliver on programmes, and there's a really good arrangement there. So, like for example, with Play, we've got a really nice system in which when the young people that Julian's service supports, when they hit 18, and the young people with disabilities, they transition into a different range of services, and some of that would be us. So that information sharing and that transition, that was a conscious decision that we made. Look, let's not step on each other's toes here. Let's make a kind of clear decision in terms of how we offer that. And we're currently working with the Positive Future guys that sit within the sport development team about targeting a group of young people who are causing antisocial behaviour issues in Pontywydd. Again, that's right. Who's the right person to deliver it? So we've got examples where it works. So I think time and capacity to look at those examples, look at where and how they've worked and what the ingredients are, and then do more of the same, I think is probably what I would say.
Yeah, as Dave said, it is doing more of the same. Obviously, when you look at the table, there are things that cross over. We are coming together, I think, probably as three services more so. From a purely sports point of view, as we've mentioned, with regard to trust and what's happening in Newport, we've seen a number of examples down there where they've brought in more funding. And I know this firsthand because where we've employed casual coaches in the past, they've actually gone down there to become employees in Newport on, I think, 30-hour contracts, and they're based within schools, just purely working across the areas where the children are at risk of disaffection. So the money they've been able to bring in from that, and I think as much as we would want to do that now, we haven't got the capacity or the people on the ground to be able to do it, whereas that door could open in the future.
Okay. Well, as you're aware, our core budget is extremely small anyway, and we've always had to think outside the box to really to develop and make things work. And we've always adapted and changed what we've offered. We made sure it is child-centred. We made sure what we're offering is what the community want. But it is reliant on how do we fund these activities. So if a school wishes us to work with them, we can say, yes, we can do that piece of work, but there is a cost to it. We got set for similar things. That's how I suppose the play schemes have been devised. The Community Council want X, Y, Z, so we work with the Community Council and say, yeah, we can run it, but it's going to cost this. At the moment, and I suppose from thinking differently and how we work with young people, that links very close with the youth service. Those young people, we run our provisions, we will have a paid member of staff, and then you might have 3 volunteers running that provision with that paid member of staff. So you've got the quality there. We're training at young people, so we've got to overlap the support by Dave on that. And we run 22 weekly provisions now, after-school provisions. So those after-school provisions are really, really running well. So for me, I would like, and we've had these conversations already, so after those provisions that are for children up to the age of 11, now they're very well attended, these after-school provisions, and some of them have been running for 20 years, the first one I set up. But what is lovely is if we have that opportunity, so when they get to that age, we can then transfer them over to David, and then that provision, we know the ones that, like little Johnny will be coming to the provision, but you've got to be careful because when he's around Tara, blah, 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 this could happen, or there's triggers for this, but it's important they attend these provisions away from their parents, away from their kids, so they have that opportunity to let the steam, so they could be transferred over by the relationships with the youth service, and they could run that provision after. So there is that transition into another provision. So for me, it is about thinking out the box.
Did anyone else want to ask anything? Yeah. Okay, so John, then, if you want me to pick anything up.
I've just quickly gone through section 3. It's probably worth me very quickly vocalising what I was saying in my head so that we're sure. I mean, question 5 was about anything missed off the principles. We haven't talked about the principles that were included in the questionnaire. I'm taking that as a signal that actually you're in agreement with the principles that we're aiming to, which are at the start of Appendix 2. In terms of current offer, I think we've largely covered the territory. I mean, the survey responses, noting what I said towards the beginning of this session about people's knowledge of different areas being at different levels, but the survey indicated, a high degree of agreement with the current offer from Play, less so in sports development and youth, but linked into that this communication promotion type business. So I think we've got some clear messages there already that we certainly need to communicate and promote better. That may also indicate that we need to tweak the offer as well in one or both cases. Question 8 was, that was the last of the offer there. Settings and location section then. We haven't talked a lot about settings and location this afternoon. The teams, Play is different from sports. Sports is different from youth. Play tends to reach large parts of the community at regular points throughout the year. Sports development does it in a different way because it is a facilitator rather than a direct service provision. By and large, there are some exceptions, but it's signposting to clubs, so that's how it reaches its masses. And location is perhaps less of an issue. Youth, I think we have touched on some areas where we've got to think about what we do. And something that David and I have conversations about before, there were a few mentions of residentials. And we perhaps hold slightly different views on residentials. For specific groups, and the looked after children was one group that was mentioned. Yes, there's undoubtedly a value. In fact, for other groups, any group, there's a value in giving them experiences they might not otherwise get. What we're going to have to do, though, is balance whether providing those, given the resources they require, denies the opportunity to make wider provision, because they do take a lot of resource to run. So I think
that, I just wanted to ask, are we solely funding, so obviously there are a lot of vulnerable groups, is funding coming in from social care or wherever to help with those residentials, or is it just solely youth funding?
I'm not aware of other funding, no, would you?
For the one I mentioned specifically, that's being paid for by the post-16 social care team through their funding, specifically for that funding.
So that I wouldn't have an issue with. Yeah. At a service level, the council might. Yeah. But in terms of the stuff where we are funding or we are resourcing, I think we do have to have more, because what came out very strongly is that people would like to see more provision in more places. The team's not going to grow. Unless some new grant funding arises, it's simply not going to grow. In order to get to more areas, we have to deliver differently. It's just, again, logic. And it will mean that the frequency of delivery in some areas may go down because it's going into other areas, which is where the links with the centre in Cwmbran, the one in Blenavon, actually you start to get a picture where there's provision in the north and the south. We may have something coming in the middle, and what do we wrap around there? So I think there's more that we will probably be doing on settings location, and that's where your young people and their involvement is going to be critical. Back to the point you made about if we involved them, when we start talking about those things, that's where they're really going to get interested and tell us what they think. Just into the other question section, and I think we've probably covered most of these. Balance between targeted and specific groups, that's always going to be something that we need to think about. If you had an open-ended budget, you would provide to everybody all of the time, everywhere, wouldn't you? In a situation where you haven't got an open-ended budget, I think the moral responsibility within the council would err towards making sure that vulnerable groups are represented more in the vision that we make, up to the point that we've got resources that we can then extend to others. I think that's just a function of the council. We didn't have much by way of response to question 13 about what we might stop providing. I said probably a good hour or so ago, there's plenty of demand from schools and other places. I don't think there's anybody saying don't do this anymore. So I suspect we probably won't revisit that too much with individuals. It's how we do things differently. And similarly, there wasn't much of a response to helping other organisations or groups make their own or make supported provision. I think we are going to have to get a bit more into that if budgets continue to drop, because we. Remember scrutiny years ago we did something on transport, didn't we? It must be about 14 years, I suspect. And at that time, my memory's not entirely clear, but I think we basically said, well, there are buses in schools, there are buses in social care, there are buses here, there and everywhere, and never shall they meet. And I don't think it's much different. But we do have the integrated passenger unit. I think I would be doing them a disservice if I didn't say they will have a much better handle on things than perhaps it did all those years ago. So it's worth exploring that. It is worth exploring that. Sorry, and the last one really was in this territory of Torvine Leisure Trust and Sports Development, which I look forward to seeing your recommendation on that one. So I don't have anything else, but I'm happy to take any more questions if there are any.
Members, any more questions on it? If not, then we'll let you all go and we'll make some recommendations. But thank you very much for coming.
Can I just say you're all doing an excellent job, and thank you very much. So, well done.
Yeah, so yeah. Okay, so who wants to start on recommendations? Who wants to go first? I look at Rose first because I know she will.
So I think we should actually look at perhaps inviting the trust in to hear their point of view and see what they can offer and what have you. I think that's a major concern because we're looking at staff jobs and an issue and we need to explore before we make any recommendations of that type. My other one was the transport. Obviously there's a blockage with our young people in transport and some way, whether or not it's our new electric vehicle fleet that we have to link up from the start, or whether it's linking with the old vehicles that's left in the schools and within our youth service and everywhere else. But I'm sure there's minibuses parked somewhere after school that are not in use where our youth and play provision could utilise them. So that's me for a minute.
It was my main one was oh sorry. So my main one that John picked up at the end about youth provision and talking about residentials versus location. The one, they need to review that, but also review it in regards of the youth groups and stuff in the area. So, for example, within my own ward, there's quite a lot of provision. Whether that is all used to its maximum capacity, whereas other areas have got nothing. So I think they do need to do a good review on that.
We have the 20-year-old play group that started 20 years ago, and that started up at the church, and it's still going and it's going strong, and I value that totally. But I am going to clear what's happening as far as youth provision.
I've got a few from pre-agenda, which you all seem keen to take forward. So it's just to remind members, you made 5 altogether. The first one, we need to make sure that not only are the teams providing a good, cost-effective service, but they are reaching the people who need it most. I think a lot of you're saying it in those sort of words, so I'm just generalising it. Steps need to be taken to ensure that the services being offered are coordinated appropriately so that people are able to gain a better understanding of what services are available. And also, I think the most important thing is to ensure that there's no duplication, really, of services across the 3 teams. The next one then, need to ensure a wide variety of young people, including, and I think Julian mentioned this at the end, including vulnerable young people, are consulted on what's available and participating in shaping the future service delivery. Consultations to support and understanding the needs of young people in the local area to effectively be able to design services and target resources should be ongoing. And then lastly, need to consider engaging with young people in places they choose, supporting them with their communities and building positive relationships over time. I think there was one last one that Councillor Thomas, did you want to take forward, I think you mentioned explore linking or working with groups such as Scouts to involve them to help in sports development activities. I think Ben mentioned the Mick Morris run, was it? Or Couch to K or something?
Yeah, the guides, the brownies, the scouts, the air cadets, the army cadets. There's a lot of uniform groups out there, I think, that, we could work with, learn from, and they could learn from us. Yeah. And I did declare that I am a member of Torvine Scouts, didn't I?
Did we pick up on the communication strategy? Because there's a need to sort of, the play service actually communicate fantastically. We get emails on a regular basis. Yeah. The front page of the Torvine website is usually, this is what play has been doing. But we don't have that information on all the services, and I think if there was a coordinated approach to the communication, it would be better.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. And even if they just have a central hub of a website or something that you can tap into. But my other one I wanted to flag up as well was the consistency. So obviously of provision, but so there's no gap between the end of play and the beginning of youth.
That's sport.
Was there anything else anyone wanted to?
Yeah, I think the question we asked was, did it involve children? And I think they should involve children more to see what the children want.
Yeah. I wouldn't like to recommend for or against transferring to Leisure Trust until we've had that conversation, and I think we need that conversation with all groups, really. I can see the benefits on one particular service going there, but whether the 3 of them would be a good move, I don't know.
Yeah, same. I'm happy for them to, explore more detail, see what it would mean, but, I don't want to give them a steer either way until we know more. If there's anything else on those, I think Leanne will type them up and send them out, and if you think of anything else, just, let her know. So do we need to do the pre-thingy for the next item?
Yeah, I think Leanne probably.
Okay, so we can just end it. I just wanted to check whether it was before or after. Okay, so I'm going to close the meeting. So the next meeting will be the 6th of the 5th.